Well, we are back. Today it's Clint and myself as we wrap up our January Bible study. Our emphasis, we kind of followed the Lifeway theme of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And we use some of their materials as we study for these classes and these opportunities to prepare the readings for you. There's 2 more days. There's 1 more day of reading. And then we'll switch up and do a little bit something different on the website for you, and we'll give you more information on that as we come available. But as we get started, Clint's going to comment and talk about some things about the importance of regular Bible study and why we're doing this. And so I'm going to let him do that.
Yeah, as we were getting ready this morning, I mentioned to Daniel that I've been doing some research, and I just feel strongly that Bible study is important. Bible reading, Bible study is important for Christians. But we say that all the time. So why is it important? And of course, there's the things that ministers always say, like this is our rule book, or this is our guidebook, or this is our map, and all that. But I want to give you something. I did some research online, and there was a survey done by I think it's called the Pew Foundation, or
Pew Research Foundation.
Pew Research Foundation. I believe it was 2010 when this was done, and there were only 7 Bible questions that were asked to a whole bunch of folks. And it was questions like, where was Jesus born? Who was Moses? Is the Golden Rule part of the 10 Commandments? Just some basic stuff. And when they asked these questions, evangelical Protestants, on average, got 5.1 questions right out of 7. That's us, Baptists, Methodists, all us. Agnostics and atheists also took this, and they came up with a 4.4, which is pretty close to 5.1, and we were all in the same boat almost. And we got these people all around us. And by the way, Mormons came up better than us. They came up 5.7. And now, we got these folks all around us. And if we don't know basic biblical facts, and yet we're hearing discussions at work or at the hospital or around family members about religion and Bible, and how do we know when something is being wrongly quoted or twisted even, or someone's been exposed to a false teaching which they believe to be true, and now here they're bringing it to you, and you're like, wow, I didn't know that, when in fact it's not even true. So it's almost self-preservation. I think you made the comment earlier about that's one of the reasons we go to church is,
wow.
Can you explain that comment you made? Because I can't remember. It's something like we go to church because it helps protect us from false teachings or something like that.
Yeah, and so it's, as Clint was saying that, it reminded me, today's thing of 2nd John, John points out the fact, and we'll get to it in just a minute, about how the church that he's writing to is at potential to be attacked, and to be attacked in subtle ways by visiting people, speaking to them, misleading them. And, when it comes to us, there's so much religious information out there today. There's blogs, there's Facebook posts. The whole world's full of religious information. And by the way, that's not anything different. We've had TV and mass media now for a long time. But that's not a church. And the people that are a lot of times propagating that, they're not doing it necessarily for your well-being. They're doing it for their well-being.
The business of religion.
Yeah, and there's a ton of money there. There's a lot of money in it. And that's not against the people that write books. I've tried writing. It's not Clint writes. It's not against that. It's not against people who are teaching. We're trying to teach. But it's against the people that are doing that, and you all are ingesting it without the insulation and the protection of a body of believers that are part of you.
Right. Our Sunday school classes, our discipleship efforts, I count as discipleship what we've been involved in this month. It's designed to help us to show what is true, biblical, and stay away from some of the bad stuff. And that brings us back really to the purpose of why John wrote these 3 letters. And we said it in the first video. We talked. You guys mentioned it even in that, you and David in that video. He was addressing the issue of false teachers. And here we are, 2,000 years later, still dealing with the same issues. And yet today they're so well disguised across media that you really hear something, you think, wow, that sounds dead on. And it won't even be biblical, but it's presented in that way. So John is addressing the issue, and he writes these letters, and he says, he talks a lot about what is a true Christian and what's not. And by the way, here's some things you need to be aware of and all this kind of, we'll get into that. So I'm going to hush talking about that introductory stuff. I just wanted to point that out, that there's a real good reason why we need to be involved in Bible study, ongoing Bible study at home, at church, both. So we're today going to look at 2nd and 3rd John and then end with kind of just a little bit of a review. But you want to start with that?
Yeah, I'll jump into 2nd John here, and as we do that, one of the things that was really interesting to me as I studied this passage, John writes it, and he says, to the lady chosen by God and to her children. And as I begin to do some study on that and some research into it, a lot of the commentators and commentaries who've read this over the years, going all the way back to people in the 2nd and 3rd century, felt like that John was essentially using the word lady there as a term describing a church. And there's a lot of reasons why. You can go into what the Greek word was and how close that is to the word mother and lady, and so those sorts of things. But if you read this thing, and it's only 13 verses in its entirety, you begin to catch that. Because let me just give you some high points. To the lady chosen by God and to her children, whom I love in the truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth. So he's kind of speaking bigger than just one particular maybe family. And then he goes on to say in verse 4, it has given me great joy to find some of your children walking in the truth. And he's talking about finding some of her children. And the idea there is, I think John's looking at the universal church, that as he's making his travels, he's finding different groups of people that now align back with this church that he is writing to in this original church. And then he goes on in verse 8, he says, watch out that you do not lose what we have worked for, but that you may be rewarded fully. And in verse 10, he says, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take them into your house. And we think physical home, but John, once again, I think is referencing to a church, and he's saying, hey, when these people show up and they're not bringing this original teaching of who Jesus is, that he is God in the flesh, that he lived, he breathed his life, and that he was resurrected from the dead. He says, don't take them in, because they're trying to profit off of you. Then he says, anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. And so he uses a big term when he's just used a very narrow term, and it seems to me to indicate that he is talking to a group of people, a body of people. And then, to me, verse 13 kind of caps it off and is the kind of the culmination of it. He says, the children of your sister, who is chosen by God, send their greetings. Well, I think what John is saying, the churches that I'm at now, that's your sister church. And we still use that terminology today. Yeah. That they send their greetings to you as well. And I think that as Clint and I were talking about this, that there is so much that you and I can learn individually. And I like to learn individually. I like to listen. I like to kind of ingest. I like to read. But there is a reality that remains theory until you live it out in community.
Yeah, it's I used to do some coaching and teaching a lot and training of missionaries and all, field of education. I've just been involved in it forever and ever. And one thing I learned is I can train somebody to do something as a coach or even as a missionary trainer. I can train them. But until they take it and make it their own, until they practice it in life, they don't learn it. They stick it up here and then it goes away. And some of you guys who are watching this, hopefully, maybe played high school football and stuff like that, you can train. I was an offensive line coach. I could train a tackle how to try to do a reach block on an end coming across. I could walk him through it. I could explain it. But until he got down there and he had at full speed to work that out and make it work, he really didn't learn it. But once he got down there at full speed and he was able to stop this guy who's kind of trying to rush through and kill the guy with the ball, Once he learned how to make that work, then he had it, and you didn't have to teach it again. So you can get stuff in theory, even spiritual stuff, but until you live it out in the world, it's not yours. You haven't made it your own yet.
And that's actually, as somebody who's been working with students now for 15, 20 years, that's something that I really struggle to get parents to grasp, because it's so easy to get our children to parrot us, whether they do it out of desire, whether they do it out of just complacency, whether they do it out of, I get something out of this or whatever. They do. But until a child grows up and has to say, okay, this God whom my parents worship, okay, he's my God too, and my difficulties. And a lot of times that doesn't happen until they're out of the home. They're out of those safeguards. And one of the reasons that we have a church is to build those safeguards within us, because I can tell you, even as somebody who is on staff at a church, boy, there's times I show up for church meetings that my tank, if you will, is pretty empty. And just being around the body of believers helps encourage that. And I know many of you are struggling because of the restrictions that we are putting on ourselves now because of the fear of spreading so much illness too quickly. And so I just encourage you, in any way possible, keep up those connections and those communications as we go forward.
Yeah. 3 John, when you said that about the youth, I remember this verse over in 3 John, verse 4. He says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. I did a devotion on this. I brought my notes on that so I could remind myself. But, as a parent, you really want to see your kids do well. And so you try to teach them as they grow how to do when they get out in the world. And you get a lot of joy out of seeing them do well once they're out on their own. In faith, too often, I think, people try to live their life on their parents' faith. They haven't yet made it their own. They haven't stepped out there. And John, looking here, John is saying, man, it feels me really good to see you guys and what he's really referring to here is people that he presented the gospel to, he and his co-workers, and they came to Christ and they did some discipling with them, and now some time has gone by, maybe a few years, who knows, and he's looking out there and he's hearing reports and he's seeing that they're walking in the truth with all this false teaching around. They're walking in the truth, and he has a lot of joy in that. And we can teach our kids all kind of stuff, but until they make it their own by working it out in life, it's not going to register. And so,
yeah,
we have to let them do that.
On that note, let me just interrupt real quick, Clint, because what does it take? I'm a parent of children that are growing into adulthood now, and what is success? Is it having a certain type of job? Is it having a particular level of salary or whatever? I think that most of our parents who have adult children would look back and say, I thought that for my child to be successful, they had to do this, this, and this. And now I'm realizing that, the fact that they like their job, the fact that they're content, the fact that they have ability to get up and go and do and those sorts of things, that means more than, quote unquote, how much money they make or what career field they work in. Well, can we take that and push it onto some spiritual levels? A lot of times, and I've seen this in parents, especially us conservative parents, that we're not content unless our children parrot every single thing that we say. And we wouldn't do that in their career choice. But yet John's talking about people here who grow up who love God, and he can see that by the way they're acting and the way they're living out their lives. And so that's just my challenge and encouragement to you as parents. As you brought that verse, it reminded me of what is it that's success in our children? Is it the fact that they attend the same church that we do? Do they like the same kind of music we do? Do they read out of the same version of the Bible? Some of those things that we've added to it over the years.
That you brought to memory something. In my career as a missionary, I often had a chance to train new missionaries, It was really sad sometimes to have a young married couple. God called them to be missionaries. They've responded, and they sit there and talking to those of us who've been serving, for a decade or more. And they're like, man, my parents are really angry. And I'm like, why are they angry? Well, dad's a deacon and mom's a Sunday school teacher, and they raised me in the church, and we've become missionaries, and now they're angry because we're not living out that stay close to mom and daddy in the church life. And instead they're stepping out because this is what God's called them to do. We gotta let go and let God work. And John here is praising these people because they're out there in the world living for Christ. I just think that's pretty cool. There was a verse that you read, verse 11, for he who greets them shares in his evil deeds. He's saying, when these false teachers come along, basically he's saying don't give them a time of day. When they come up and knock on that front door and want to hand you this book or that or whatever, don't take it. Don't say, well, I don't want to hurt their feelings. No, don't take it. Don't have anything to do with that. You don't have to scream and yell at them, and you treat them with respect and kindness, but don't take their stuff. Don't be a co-worker with them on what they're trying to achieve. Now look over at verse 8. He flips it, and he's saying, these Christian itinerant missionaries who are coming through, because that's what he's talking about in 3 John, as they're coming through doing the work of Christ and you're helping them out, you now become what? Fellow workers, co-workers for the truth. And so, when folks are coming in and we know they're glorifying God and they're doing the right things, we want to work with them. Maybe you can't go to Africa. Maybe you can't go to South America or Mexico, whatever it is. Lydia went to Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can't do that, but you can do something to help that happen, and through that you become a fellow worker. And that's really what the church does. We reach out through our community and then sometimes across the world. And I shared this with Daniel and Derwin a while back, and I'm not sure I really communicated what I was trying to say. But I work in Okefenokee part-time as a swamp guide, and I see these spider webs. And early in the morning, when you take the first boat out, we jokingly tell the people on the front of the boat that they're going to clear the path. But these giant spider webs, because sometimes they'll be 12, 15 foot across. And that's kind of like our church in the community, spreading out like this giant spider web of faith workers, so to speak, who are living and going and coming and working, and in it all, we're doing ministry for the Lord. We're making our Savior proud as these guys made John proud. That's the way I visualize our church at work in the world.
Well, and honestly, you can look back at the last 8 or 9 months, and for those of us who haven't traveled, that would be me, and who haven't gone to foreign places and haven't, just floated yourself out there, utilizing means like YouTube and social media to, I guess, for lack of a better word, quote unquote, promote our teaching, does feel a little bit like that, because you feel like you're putting yourself out on a limb to do that. And so, and certainly people do that for their own benefit, but as a church and as a staff, one of the things that we've constantly kept up in our discussion is, and we're doing this because we want to serve and benefit our church body initially. If it spreads beyond that out into our community, if it spreads beyond that to whoever else may see it, then that's fine. But our goal is to serve our people. And, Clint mentioned it, so we'll just hit it for just a minute. In 2 John, it's a letter to a particular church about things that are happening in that church, and some things that he's encouraging them to do to guard themselves against and to protect themselves for. Then in 3 John, it's a letter direct to an individual, possibly within that same church, possibly a part of another church. We don't particularly know, but in that one, he's encouraging them now to and one, he's almost encouraging protection. He's encouraging that in 2 John, he's saying, as a church, you have a responsibility to care for your group of people. But then when he writes to the individual, he's like, you're doing a good job, and you need to do more. And not in a need to do like you better do. It's a keep doing it.
Yeah.
And so the call there for us as believers is to be, I think John gives us a beautiful picture here of be in a place that strengthens you, encourages you, and to some degree protects you, but be in that place to go do. And you mentioned caring for itinerant missionaries and those sorts of things that Gaius was doing. I think of some of you in the jobs that you have, and the way that you bring God's hope into the place where you are, and how you're encouraging people along who are potentially part of the broader church, the whole church of God. And then those who don't even know Christ, you're giving them an opportunity to do that. So I think that's an interesting contrast between those two very short letters and how they can apply to us today.
I love 1 John. And 2nd, 3rd John I love 1 John. But here in verse 11 of 3rd John, he comes kind of back around to something that he pounded throughout the book of 1 John, which is, he who does good is of God, but he who does evil has not seen God. And remember in 1 John, we're getting kind of to that review, but throughout 1 John, over and over and over, John pounded that God is love. We are supposed to love others. We're supposed to do good. Now why? It's for the glory of God. It promotes Christ to the world and lets people see this very positive view of the love of God. And in today's world, unfortunately, I said this in a sermon one time in a church, I think we got our Christianity and our politics so melded together that people are almost like, well, you're a Republican, oh, you're a Christian. And then the meanness that goes on in politics is transferred, and they say, oh, well, that's what Christians do. And so that's not what we're supposed to be about at all. I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, or independent. We show the love of Christ and the goodness of God to the world. And if we can't do that in our politics, we have a serious problem. We need to back up and confess our sin to God and get God first in everything. So he goes back in verse 11 to harping on what he did a lot of 1 John talking about. Another point that I really like in 3 John, and I'm going to stop talking about 3 John, in verse 2, he talked about he was praying and praying for Gaius. And if you got your Bibles while you're listening to us, look at that verse 2 of 3 John. He says, I pray that you may prosper in all things. He's talking about your work, your life, what you're about. Prosper, be successful. And then he talks about health, be in good health. Then he gets to the spiritual, just as your soul prospers. So when we pray for folks, a lot of times we're like, Lord, just heal them, please heal them. But, it's okay to pray for people to be successful in their business, to be successful, because ultimately, if we're successful, healthy, happy, hopefully we're going to be thanking God. They had a guy on television this morning. He is a believer, I think. And he's a country musician, but not a star. But he's been in it for 2 decades, and finally he got on some big show on television. And so his music is out there, and people are, oh, well, that's great, let's buy it and all this. And he was, it was a kind of informal discussion, but he put the light on God. So in his success, he's trying to turn the light to God. And that's what we're about. That's what we do. But whether it's success or like the lady I was talking to a few minutes ago, they're dealing with family, health issues, just really bad health issues. And yet even in that, she and her husband are glorifying God. So either way, in success or not success, glorifying God, that's what we're to be about.
You made the comment about how a lot of times we take our religious identity and we tie that to a political identity or something else. And I think that indicates a larger issue that we really have in the Western world. And I'm going to try to say this very carefully, but we think that we stand alone. And when we stand before God, we will stand alone. And by the way, we want that, because I'm going to stand before God because of who Jesus is. So at that point, I'm okay with standing there because Christ is standing on my behalf and will stand on my behalf. But we have a huge built into our culture, this individualism, and that what I want matters more than what everybody else wants. And if what they want is different from what I want, they're out to get me. And we find that around the world that's not always the case. And to some degree, maybe it's our success has exacerbated this model of behavior. But I think John is making a crucial point through these three epistles that you can't serve God without community, outside of community, because he keeps saying you better love each other.
Yeah.
And if you've put everybody else out of your life and there's nobody to love, then you're showing your your hatred towards them, your fear of them, and you're restricting yourself from being able to serve God as John is instructing us to. And I mean, go back to back in the first Gospel of John, or the first Epistle of John, chapter 2, he says this: "We know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands. Whoever says, 'I know him,' but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in him." He said, okay, what are God's commands? Well, Jesus summed them up in two things, as we've talked about. But John goes on to say this: "But if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in him." And he goes on to say this: "You love one another." Verse 9, "Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is in the darkness." So he has this huge run up to how do you treat each other? And so, I mean, that's just a constant reminder to me that a lot of times I have this idea that if I can just separate myself from enough people, then the problem's all with them. And the problem's not with me. But I find that wherever I go, the problems are still there. And I think John's reminding us that we're called into community as a church to work these things out together.
To me, if we can remember John's teaching, well, we got it from Christ, so it's Christ's teaching, but if we can remember this, that we love God with everything we got, and we love our neighbors as ourselves, and if we can just keep that day by day, simplify everything down to let's just love people the way we want to be loved. Let's love God because he loved us first. If we just keep our focus through the day, then that solves a lot of problems. For me, at least it does, because I can back up and not react in anger or whatever, and I can back up and say, wait a minute, I'm called to love this guy, even though I don't like what he's doing.
Right.
And John he really pounds, and I've got my Bibles all marked up because I keep marking these things in here, but he just throughout 1 John just really pounds, if you say you belong to God, if you say you're in the light, you will live that way. You will love people, and the evidence will be there. And if you're talking it and not walking it, you're lying.
And that's where, let me try an illustration here. If you ever bought a car, or ever you started looking at a particular model of car, and then everywhere you go, you see that car. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, as I've been reading and studying these over the last couple of weeks, I've seen this view that I think that John is propagating here of our behavior. And one of the things he does is in 1 John chapter 3, he says, we are called the children of God. That means that my identity is forever linked to Clint's identity, and it's forever linked to your identity. And I'm going to tell you something, at times I got a problem with that. I mean, we don't have half the time, and I have 10 brothers and sisters, and half the time we can't even get along with our own family.
I didn't know you had that many.
Yeah. I mean, half the time we can't get along with our own family, and we whether we don't necessarily hide our identity, but we and every now and then a sibling will come back and say, hey, we were raised in the same house. We have the same background. And that's the same thing for us as believers, that we're raised in the same house. We're children of the same God. Yeah. And so I can't shun you to the extent of not loving you, because what I'm doing is that reflection shows on me.
Yeah, we're all part of the same family, and so the identifying characteristic of Christians throughout the ages has been glorifying God and loving other people, even in some of the worst things that have happened in history. The London plague, some of y'all don't study history, you don't know what I'm talking about, but thousands of people died way back then, and yet the Christians still ministered to others. And during times of war, there's that famous story from World War I where this old lady, on Christmas Day, I think it was, walks out of her house and basically gets the Germans and whoever's on the other side, French or British, to stop shooting, and they come together and have Christmas dinner. You know, just loving, and a lot of things that go on in society. The stopping of slavery was begun in England by a Christian who was serving in Parliament and refused to give up until he could get slavery abolished. You know, people here in America who were committed believers, loving the Lord, fought against bad things as well. So that's how the world knows us, is that we love people and we try to work for the good of people and glorify God in all of it.
I had a conversation with someone probably about 7 or 8 months ago, and we were talking about some of the tensions in our current society, our society in South Georgia right now, and then our country as a whole. And his question to me was, you know, when does this stop? Will it end in my generation? And I remember as I was talking with him, and he's of a different ethnicity than I am. He has a different background than I do. And I was trying to be very, you know, listen. I was trying to listen. And I said to him, I don't know. I don't think it does happen in our generation. But that doesn't stop us from doing what is right. And I think you just mentioned, you know, people died. People who had, you know, planted trees that they never saw bear fruit. And they did it out of service to God. And let's not get short-sighted. If there's anything that's happening in these epistles, John is encouraging the long view.
Yeah.
He is saying, hang in there. This is who God is. This is what he's called us to. Just keep going. And it's not a just keep going as I'm going to whip you into shape. It's this is our foundation. This is our fundamentals. And our long view is not to say, well, the world's going, you know, to pot. Our long view is to say we're the children of God, called to bring God's light to the world, and it is making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, and you just said and pointed out, or made me think of something. I'm sorry, I'll get it right in a minute. There are people, and I've heard them talk, that's like, the world is going to pot, everything's bad, so I'm just going to get me and my family, we're just going to hunker down. You know, we're just going to take care of me and mine. As Christians, we don't get that option.
No.
We don't have that option. We are clearly told over and over to love. And we're not told to love them because they love us. We're told to love them because Christ loves us. They may not love back, but we're still told to love them. So.
Yeah, and that's you know, you think about the early Christian church and and what happened with them, and forced into the catacombs to survive inside of Rome. Coming out at night, and so many stories of coming out at night and taking care of the beggars, picking up the children that have been abandoned as human sacrifice. And here these people are, their very lives are being, you know, pushed to the margins, and yet they're continuing the love of Christ.
We had a situation in Nigeria here probably 7 years ago. There was a tremendous drought, and so a lot of people in the far north in one particular area in Nigeria were going to starve to death. They had no food, because in Nigeria you grow and then you eat that till the next growing season, and what you're growing there you eat till the next, and it just you have nothing saved up. And so in this one tribe, the Fulani tribe, 16 million people, a movement of God began about 20 years ago. There's now, we don't know how many Christians there are, 16 million. It could easily be 30,000 Christians. 30,000 to 16 million, you know, the odds are stacked against you, and they tend to kill those Christians if they find them. That drought hit. The Christians had access to food and money to buy food. They bought bags of food and drove up into that region to the people that were hunting them, basically, before the drought. And they gave those people food to the glory of God. That's what we're called to do in the whole world, you know. And man, if we could really shine for Jesus, yeah, we're not going to stop the world from going to pot, because there's a mess out there. But individuals, yes, we can show the love of Christ, and they can come to Christ. They turn around, and the ripples just keep going. So.
Yeah, this is where John leaves us with, and this is, I think it's why he writes these letters. You know, he's gone, and he just wants them to know that, hey, God is faithful, remain faithful to him, And those individual opportunities, they'll make a world of difference, especially in those individual lives.
I think I've about talked up my points.
I think I have too, but and just a challenge and an encouragement to you. Pick a passage of scripture and read it. We read through these epistles 2.5 times if we follow the daily readings. Very simple, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes a day, and we can do that. And those are things that will help us, encourage us to hang in there when the difficulties arise and when we're not sure about what we're doing, because God's faithful.
Yeah. And if you are really interested in what we've been talking about in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, between the devotions and these videos, Brother Derwin has done at least, I think, 4 sermons, 3 or 4.
He'll be on his 4th this week.
4th this week, where he's also supporting this effort. So there's stuff there online. You can go back and look at it and read it. And of course, you can always ask questions of any of us.
Yeah.
We'll be glad to talk to you. But those of you who've been watching, and we've had some good positive comments, thank you. God bless you.